Marcus Chen had always been a simple man with simple pleasures. His small research outpost on Kepler 442b was meant to be a quiet assignment, cataloging mineral deposits for the Terran Mining Consortium. The planet was supposed to be uninhabited, just another rocky world with decent atmospheric conditions and untapped resources. That assumption changed everything when he found her. The creature was no bigger than a human child, maybe 4 feet tall, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light of his habitat dome. Her limbs were impossibly thin, almost fragile-looking, and her large eyes held a depth of intelligence that made Marcus's breath catch. She had been rummaging through his waste disposal unit when he discovered her. Her movements weak and desperate. At first, Marcus thought she might be some kind of indigenous wildlife. But the way she froze when she saw him, the way her eyes widened with what could only be described as fear and hope mixed together, told him otherwise. This was a sentient being, and she was starving. Her ribs were visible through her translucent skin, and her movements had the shaky quality of someone who hadn't eaten in days. When she tried to run, she stumbled and fell, too weak to properly escape. Marcus found himself moving slowly, hands raised in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. The mining consortium had strict protocols about first contact situations. But looking at this dying child, Marcus couldn't bring himself to care about regulations. He backed away slowly, then returned to his habitat to gather food. The emergency rations weren't appetizing by human standards, but they were designed to be nutritionally complete and safe for a variety of biological systems. When he returned, the creature was still there, huddled against the waste unit, like she was trying to disappear into it. Marcus placed the food packages on the ground between them and stepped back. He spoke softly, knowing she probably couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his peaceful intentions. She approached the food with extreme caution, sniffing at it with what appeared to be some kind of sensory organ near her nose. When she finally took a bite, her entire body seemed to relax with relief. Marcus watched as she devoured the rations with an intensity that spoke of prolonged hunger. Over the next several hours, Marcus established a routine. He would bring food, place it at a safe distance, and retreat to his habitat. The creature would emerge from whatever hiding spot she had found and eat. Gradually, she began to stay visible when he approached, though she maintained her distance. On the third day, she spoke. The words were like nothing Marcus had ever heard. A combination of musical tones and what sounded almost like whispered wind. But somehow, impossibly, he understood the meaning. She was thanking him and telling him her name. Zara. Marcus pointed to himself and said his name slowly. Zara tilted her head and repeated it back to him, her pronunciation strange but recognizable. They had made their first real communication. As the days passed, their interactions became more complex. Zara's English improved rapidly, far faster than should have been possible. She explained, in her halting way, that her people had what she called mind touch, the ability to share thoughts and memories directly. With physical contact, she could learn much more quickly than through spoken language alone. When Marcus finally worked up the courage to let her touch his hand, the sensation was unlike anything he had experienced. For just a moment, he felt her thoughts mixing with his own, her gratitude washing over him like a warm tide. But underneath that gratitude was something else. Fear. But not fear of him. Fear for him. Through their shared connection, Zara explained her situation. Her people, the Kairathi, were not native to this world. They were refugees, fleeing from something she called the Hunger Wars in their home system. Her family's ship had crashed on this planet months ago, and she had been the only survivor. Or so she had thought. She had been alone for so long, eating whatever she could find, growing weaker each day. The planet's native vegetation was toxic to her species, and she had been slowly starving when Marcus found her. But now she was strong enough to search properly, and she had found signs that others might have survived the crash. Marcus felt a chill as she explained this. Not because he feared other survivors, but because of what Zara told him next. Her people were not just refugees, they were warriors, fleeing a war they had been losing. and Kyrathi warriors were genetically modified for combat. Their bodies capable of incredible feats of strength, and their minds hardened for battle. Zara herself was different. She was what her people called untouched, a child who had not yet undergone the warrior modifications. She was essentially a civilian, small and vulnerable, but her family, if they were alive, would be full-grown Kyrathi warriors, and they would be very protective of their young. Marcus asked the question that had been growing in his mind since she first touched him. Are they dangerous? Zara's response chilled him to the bone. Through their mental link, he felt her memories of the warriors of her people, beings 8 feet tall, with skin that could turn diamond hard at will, strength that could bend steel, and reflexes faster than human eyes could follow. They were living weapons, designed for a war that had consumed star systems. But more than their physical capabilities, it was their mindset that worried Marcus. Kyrathi warriors were absolutely devoted to protecting their own kind, especially their young. They would view any alien species as a potential threat until proven otherwise. And if they found Zara with a human, if they thought he had been holding her captive or might harm her, their response would be swift and lethal. Zara tried to reassure him. She would explain to them that he had helped her, that he was a friend. But Marcus could sense her uncertainty. She was just a child, and she had been separated from her family for months. She didn't know what state they might be in, whether they would listen to her before acting. Despite his growing fear, Marcus couldn't bring himself to abandon Zara. She had become more than just a lost alien child to him. Through their mental connection, he had glimpsed her thoughts and feelings, her loneliness and gratitude. She was a person, as real and complex as any human he had known. The idea of leaving her alone again was unbearable, so he made a decision that would change everything. He would help her search for her family. Despite the danger, he had a small exploration vehicle that could cover more ground than Zara could on foot, and his orbital scanners might be able to detect signs of Kyrathi technology. They spent 3 days searching before they found the crash site. It was hidden in a canyon system about 50 kilometers from Marcus's outpost. The wreckage scattered across the rocky floor, but as they approached, Marcus's sensors detected something that made his blood run cold. Power signatures, active ones. Someone was alive down there, and they had been busy. As Marcus guided his vehicle closer, he could see that parts of the wreckage had been reassembled into what looked like a fortified position. Kyrathi technology was apparently quite resilient. Zara became increasingly excited as they drew nearer, her mental emanations filled with hope and joy. Marcus tried to share her enthusiasm, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was approaching his own doom. When they finally reached the crash site, 3 figures emerged from the rebuilt shelter. Even at a distance, Marcus could see they were massive, easily dwarfing both him and Zara. Their movements had a predatory grace that spoke of incredible physical capability. Zara leaped from the vehicle before Marcus could stop her, running toward the figures with a cry of joy that needed no translation. Marcus watched as the largest of the 3 figures swept her up in what was clearly a reunion embrace. For a moment, Marcus felt a surge of relief. Zara was safe, reunited with her family. His mission was complete, but then all 3 figures turned their attention to him, and Marcus felt his relief evaporate. He was looking at beings that could only be described as living weapons. Their bodies were tall and powerfully built, their skin having a metallic sheen that suggested the armor-like quality Zara had described. But it was their eyes that truly unnerved him. They held an intelligence that was alien but unmistakable. And something else. A calculating assessment that made Marcus feel like prey, being evaluated by predators. Zara was speaking rapidly in her native tongue, clearly explaining who Marcus was and what he had done for her. But Marcus could see the skepticism in the warriors' postures. They were listening to her, but they were not convinced. The largest of the 3, who Marcus assumed was Zara's mother based on the protective way she held the child, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was deep and resonant, with undertones that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's chest. Zara translated quickly. She wants to know why you helped me. She says humans are known to the Kyrathi, but not as friends. Marcus felt a chill at that statement. If the Kyrathi knew about humans, and not in a positive way, his situation had just become much more complicated. But he answered honestly, looking directly at Zara's mother as he spoke. Because she was dying, and I couldn't watch a child starve. It's what any decent person would do. As Zara translated his words, Marcus saw something shift in the mother's expression. Not softening exactly, but a recognition of something she understood. She spoke again, longer this time, her tone less aggressive but still wary. She says that honor in protecting the young is something the Kyrathi respect, Zara translated. But she also says that humans have a reputation for deception, and that kindness can hide darker purposes. Marcus was beginning to understand the delicate position he was in. These beings were grateful for his help with their child, but they were also warriors from a species apparently at odds with humanity. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and his life could end very quickly. What happened next would determine whether his act of simple human kindness would be remembered as a bridge between species, or as the last mistake he ever made. The tension at the crash site was thick enough to cut with a blade. Marcus stood perfectly still as Zara's mother approached him, her massive frame moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns etched into her metallic-looking skin, markings that seemed to shift and flow as he watched. Her eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to hold flecks of silver, studied him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. She spoke again, her words carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Marcus could feel in his bones. Zara's translation came quickly, but her young voice carried undertones of nervousness. My mother says she is Kithara, war singer of the Kyrathi Deep Fleet. She wants to perform the mind meld with you, to see your true intentions regarding me and our people. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. The idea of having his mind examined by an alien warrior was terrifying. But he could see no alternative. Refusing would almost certainly be interpreted as having something to hide, and that would likely end his life very quickly. Tell her I consent, Marcus said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Kithara stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the strange, clean scent that seemed to emanate from her skin. She raised one massive hand, her fingers ending in what looked more like talons than nails, and placed it gently against Marcus's forehead. The contact was electric. Suddenly, Marcus's mind was flooded with alien thoughts and memories, but they weren't chaotic or overwhelming, as he had expected. Instead, Kithara's mental touch was precise and controlled, examining specific memories with surgical precision. He felt her relive his first encounter with Zara, experiencing his emotions as he saw the starving child rummaging through his waist. She witnessed his internal debate about protocol versus compassion, felt the genuine care that had motivated his actions. Through the link, Marcus sensed Kithara's surprise at the purity of his motivations. But the examination didn't stop there. Kithara delved deeper, exploring Marcus's memories of human society, his understanding of his own species' history and tendencies. What she found there seemed to disturb her greatly. Through the link, Marcus began to understand why the Kyrathi viewed humans with such suspicion. In Kithara's memories, he saw images of first contact between their species. It had not gone well. The Kyrathi had encountered human expansion forces in the outer rim of their territory several decades ago. The humans had initially appeared friendly, offering trade and cultural exchange, but as Kithara's memories revealed, the humans had been conducting detailed scans of Kyrathi technology and biology, information that was later used in weapons designed specifically to kill her people. The betrayal had been devastating. An entire Kyrathi colony had been wiped out by human forces using bioweapons calibrated to their physiology. The attack had been a test run for larger military operations, but the Kyrathi had proven more resilient and dangerous than expected. What followed was a brief but brutal conflict that ended only when both species realized they had bigger problems. The hunger wars that Zara had mentioned were the result of that conflict. The fighting between humans and Kyrathi had weakened both species' defenses in the region, allowing an extragalactic swarm intelligence called the Devourers to establish a foothold in their space. Both species had been forced to abandon entire star systems as the Devourers consumed everything in their path. Marcus experienced Kithara's memories of the evacuation from her home world. The desperate flight of refugee ships as biomechanical horrors consumed the planet behind them. He felt her rage at having to abandon everything her people had built, and her deeper rage at the human betrayal that had made such devastation possible. But as Kithara continued her examination of Marcus's mind, something began to change in her mental emanations. She was finding things that didn't fit with her understanding of humanity. Marcus's memories showed her humans who acted with genuine compassion, who sacrificed for others without expectation of reward, who possessed a capacity for empathy that her briefings had never mentioned. Through the link, Marcus felt Kithara's confusion. The humans in Marcus's memories were complex beings, capable of both great cruelty and great kindness. They were not the uniformly treacherous species she had been taught to expect. When Kithara finally broke the mental connection, Marcus staggered backward, his mind reeling from the intensity of the experience. The Kirathi warrior stood before him, her expression unreadable, but Marcus could sense that something fundamental had shifted in her perception of him. She spoke to the other two warriors in rapid, musical tones. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the body language suggested heated debate. One of the other warriors, a male with scars crisscrossing his metallic skin, seemed to be arguing for immediate action. His gestures toward Marcus were unmistakably hostile. Zara moved to stand between Marcus and the scarred warrior, her small form defiant despite her youth. She spoke rapidly in her own language, her voice carrying surprising authority for a child. Marcus was amazed to see the scarred warrior actually step back at her words. Kithara raised her hand, and all conversation stopped. When she spoke, her tone was decisive, carrying the weight of absolute command. Zara translated, though Marcus could see the confusion in her large eyes. My mother says that your mind holds truths that conflict with what we know of your species. She has decided that you will come with us, while we consider what this means. She says that killing you now would be wasteful when your thoughts might hold answers to larger questions. Marcus wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. He was being spared, but apparently as a subject for further study, rather than out of any real trust. Still, it was better than immediate death, and it might give him a chance to prove himself. The scarred warrior spoke again, his tone clearly argumentative. Zara's translation came with obvious reluctance. Uncle Vorthak says that humans cannot be trusted, that you will betray us as soon as you can contact your people. He says it would be safer to kill you and leave this world immediately. Marcus felt a chill at the casual way Zara spoke of his potential death, but he forced himself to remain calm. Tell your uncle that he's right to be cautious, but tell him that I have no communication with my people except through scheduled supply drops every 6 months. The next one isn't for 4 more months. And tell him that I've seen what the Devourers can do through your mother's memories. If they're the real enemy, then fighting each other is exactly what they want. As Zara translated, Marcus watched Vorthak's expression carefully. The mention of the Devourers clearly struck a nerve. Through his brief connection with Kithara, Marcus had glimpsed the true horror of what these creatures represented. They weren't just destructive, they were intelligent, capable of learning from each encounter and adapting their strategies accordingly. Kithara spoke again, her tone thoughtful. This time, she addressed Marcus directly, her English heavily accented but understandable. You speak wisdom about the great enemy, she said, her voice like controlled thunder. But wisdom from human mouth is like poison honey, sweet, but deadly. How do we know you do not lead us into trap? Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine his fate. Because, he said slowly, I've seen through your memories what the Devourers do to worlds they conquer. I've seen what happened to Kirathi Prime. No human would willingly serve creatures like that, because we know we would be consumed just as readily as any other species. The effect of his words was immediate. All 3 warriors tensed, and Marcus realized he had just revealed knowledge that he shouldn't possess. Only through the mind meld could he have known the details of what had happened to the Kirathi homeworld. For a moment, Marcus thought he had made a fatal mistake. But then Kithara did something unexpected. She smiled, revealing teeth that were clearly designed for tearing flesh. Clever, she said. You use our own mind touch against our suspicions. Very human thinking. This proves you experienced true meld, not surface deception. Marcus felt some of his tension ease, but Kithara wasn't finished speaking. But it also proves you understand stakes of what we face. If you truly comprehend horror of the Devourers, then you know why we cannot risk betrayal. We will take you with us when we leave this world. And you will prove your worth through actions, not words. The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was being conscripted, essentially kidnapped, to prove his loyalty to a species that had every reason to distrust his own. He would be leaving behind everything he knew, thrust into a conflict between alien civilizations. But as he looked at Zara, who was watching him with eyes that held both hope and fear, Marcus realized he didn't have much choice. These people had good reason for their suspicions of humanity, but they were also clearly the victims in a war that threatened all sentient life in the galaxy. What exactly do you want me to do? Marcus asked. Kithara's smile became predatory. You will help us contact other Kyrathi survivor groups in this sector. Your human technology has better long-range communications than what we salvaged from our ship, and if we encounter other humans, you will help us determine which ones can be trusted and which ones cannot. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she was asking. He would essentially become a judge of his own species, helping the Kyrathi separate potential allies from potential enemies. It was a responsibility that terrified him, but he could see the logic in it. And if I refuse? Vorthak spoke up, his English even more heavily accented than Kithara's but perfectly clear in its meaning. Then we kill you quickly and honor you as warrior who chose death over betrayal. Is good death, but is still death. Marcus looked around at the three alien warriors, then down at Zara, who was still standing protectively in front of him. The child had risked herself to defend him, even against her own family. How could he do any less for her and her people? I'll help you, Marcus said finally, but I want something in return. The warriors tensed at his words, clearly not expecting conditions from someone in his position. But Marcus pressed on. I want to understand the real situation with the Devourers. If I'm going to help judge which humans might be trustworthy allies, I need to know exactly what we're all facing. No half-truths, no simplified explanations for a primitive human mind. I want the complete picture. Kithara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair demand. But knowledge of our enemy is weapon that cuts both ways. Once you truly understand what Devourers are, you cannot unknow it. Your human mind may not survive such knowledge unchanged. Marcus felt a chill at her words, but his resolve remained firm. I'll take that risk. If I'm going to help you, I need to understand what we're fighting for. What happened next would test the limits of human sanity and force Marcus to confront truths about the universe that his species was not yet ready to comprehend. But it would also forge the first real alliance between humans and Kyrathi. An alliance that might be the galaxy's only hope against the coming darkness. The real war was about to begin, and Marcus had just volunteered to stand on the front lines of a conflict that would determine the fate of all sentient life. The truth about the Devourers came to Marcus in fragments over the following days, each revelation more horrifying than the last. Kithara had not exaggerated when she warned that human minds might not survive such knowledge unchanged. They were not simply a swarm species seeking resources or territory. They were something far worse, a collective intelligence that had transcended its original biological form billions of years ago. They consumed entire civilizations not for sustenance, but to absorb their knowledge, their cultural achievements, their very essence, into a vast collective consciousness that spanned multiple galaxies. Every world they conquered, every species they devoured, made them smarter, more adaptable, more dangerous. They had absorbed the tactical genius of 1,000 warrior races, the technological innovations of countless scientific civilizations, and the survival instincts of every species they had ever encountered. Marcus learned this through a series of controlled mind melds with Kithara, each session carefully monitored to prevent his sanity from fragmenting under the weight of cosmic horror. What he experienced in those sessions would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw through the memories of Kyrathi observers the final moments of entire star systems watched as biomechanical horrors the size of planets stripped worlds down to their cores, while billions of sentient beings screamed in harmonies that crossed species barriers. He witnessed the Devourer's ability to perfectly mimic any biological or technological system they encountered, becoming indistinguishable from their prey until the moment they struck. But perhaps the most terrifying revelation was that the Devourers weren't just mindlessly destructive. They were artists, in their own horrific way. They preserved certain elements of each civilization they consumed, creating vast living museums of conquered species. Somewhere in the depths of space, entire artificial worlds existed where the last survivors of dead civilizations lived in perfect replicas of their lost homes, their descendants serving as living exhibits in the Devourer's collection. The Kirathi had discovered this truth too late to save their homeworld, but in time to realize that simple military resistance was futile. The Devourers learned from every battle, adapted to every strategy, and incorporated every effective weapon or tactic into their own arsenal. Fighting them conventionally was like trying to kill a cancer by feeding it more healthy cells. But the Kirathi had also discovered something else, a potential weakness that the Devourers themselves might not be aware of. It was this discovery that had driven their desperate exodus from their home systems, and it was why Kithara's group had been so willing to risk crash landing on an unknown world. Hidden in the deepest layers of Kirathi racial memory was an ancient legend about the First Silence, a time when the Devourers had supposedly retreated from the galaxy for unknown reasons. Most Kirathi historians had dismissed these legends as primitive mythology, but recent archaeological discoveries had suggested something different. Deep beneath the surface of their homeworld, just before the Devourer attack, Kirathi archaeologists had discovered ruins that predated their own civilization by millions of years. These ruins belonged to a species that called themselves the Architects, and they contained records of a galaxy-wide network designed specifically to combat a threat, matching the Devourer's description. The Architects had apparently succeeded in driving back the Devourers once before, but the cost had been enormous. The network they had built required the willing cooperation of hundreds of different species, each contributing unique biological and technological capabilities to create something greater than the sum of its parts. But the network had failed eventually, not because the Devourers had overcome it, but because the species involved had turned on each other once the immediate threat was gone. Paranoia and territorial instincts had fractured the alliance, leaving each species vulnerable when the Devourers finally returned. Now, with the Devourers once again spreading across the galaxy, the Kirathi were attempting to rebuild that ancient network. But they faced the same fundamental problem the Architects had: getting different species to trust each other long enough to work together. This was where Marcus became crucial to their plans. Through their mind melds, Kithara had seen something in human psychology that gave her hope. Humans had a unique capacity for empathy across species lines, an ability to form emotional connections with beings that were completely unlike themselves. Most species in the galaxy operated on fairly rigid territorial and tribal instincts. They could cooperate with others when necessary, but such alliances were always temporary and pragmatic. Humans, however, seemed capable of forming genuine emotional bonds with other species, treating them as individuals rather than simply as representatives of competing groups. Marcus's relationship with Zara was proof of this. He had risked his safety not because helping her served any strategic purpose, but because he genuinely cared about her welfare. This kind of cross-species empathy was exactly what the ancient network had needed to succeed. But it was also exactly what made many species, including many Kirathi, suspicious of human motives. Empathy could be seen as a form of manipulation, a way of lowering defenses before striking. The challenge was proving that human empathy was genuine, rather than calculated. This was the test that Marcus would face. Over the following weeks, as the Kirathi salvaged what they could from their crashed ship and prepared to leave the planet, Marcus worked with Kithara to establish contact with other survivor groups in the sector. Using his communication equipment combined with Kirathi technology, they managed to reach 17 different groups, scattered across a dozen star systems. What they found was sobering. The Kirathi diaspora was even more fragmented than they had feared. Many groups had reverted to pure survival mode, hoarding resources and viewing any contact with suspicion. Others had formed alliances with local species that were actively hostile to outsiders. Several groups had gone silent entirely, their fates unknown. But a few groups responded positively to Marcus's involvement in the communications. The fact that a human was working voluntarily with Kyrathi survivors intrigued them enough to agree to face-to-face meetings. These meetings would be the real test of whether the ancient network could be rebuilt. The first meeting took place on a neutral space station in the Vega system, a ramshackle trading post that served as a haven for refugees and outcasts from dozens of different species. Marcus had never been in such a diverse environment, surrounded by beings whose biology and psychology were utterly alien to him. The Kyrathi delegation consisted of Kithara, Vorthak, and 3 other warriors from different survivor groups. The other species present included reptilian Sithari refugees, crystalline Quell collective minds, and several others that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. The meeting almost ended in violence within the first hour. Centuries of territorial conflicts and evolutionary programming made cooperation nearly impossible. Each species viewed the others as potential competitors for limited resources, and their natural instincts screamed against trusting beings who might betray them at the first opportunity. It was Zara who changed everything. The young Kyrathi had insisted on accompanying the delegation despite the danger. And as the various species representatives argued and postured, she did something unprecedented. She walked calmly to the center of the room and began to sing. The song was wordless, a complex harmony that seemed to touch something fundamental in the minds of every species present. Through his continuing mental link with the Kyrathi, Marcus understood that Zara was using a rare gift, the ability to project pure emotion across species barriers. She was sharing her own experiences, her fear and loneliness when separated from her family, her gratitude toward Marcus for his help, her hope for a future where different species could coexist peacefully. One by one, the representatives fell silent as the song washed over them. Marcus felt tears running down his cheeks as he experienced the depth of hope and determination in Zara's young mind. Around the room, he could see similar reactions from beings whose biology shouldn't have been capable of producing tears. When the song ended, the silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, one of the Sithari representatives spoke, her translator rendering her hissing speech into standard galactic common. "The child singer shows us what we fight for," she said. "Not for territory or resources, but for the right of young ones to dream of peaceful futures. This is worth cooperation." The breakthrough came slowly, but it came. Over the following hours, the representatives began to share their own experiences with the devourer threat. And gradually, they began to see past their species' differences to their common danger. Marcus found himself serving as an unexpected mediator. His human perspective, informed by his experiences with the Kyrathi but not bound by their cultural assumptions, allowed him to find common ground between wildly different species. His empathy, the very trait that made many aliens suspicious of humans, became a bridge between groups that had never been able to communicate effectively before. By the end of the meeting, they had established the framework for what they called the New Compact, a multi-species alliance dedicated to rebuilding the ancient network that had once driven back the devourers. It would be a massive undertaking, requiring the cooperation of hundreds of species across multiple star systems. But as Marcus watched Zara playing with young representatives of other species, their different biologies and psychologies forgotten in the simple joy of childhood games, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope. The road ahead would be long and dangerous. The devourers were already spreading through the outer rim systems, consuming everything in their path. Traditional military responses had proven useless, and the political challenges of maintaining a multi-species alliance were enormous. But for the first time since the crisis began, the galaxy's sentient species were working together, instead of against each other. They had a plan, incomplete and desperate though it was. And they had something the devourers had never encountered before: a truly unified resistance, based not on fear or territorial necessity, but on genuine emotional bonds between utterly different forms of life. Marcus had fed a starving alien child because it was the right thing to do. That simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that might just save the galaxy. As he watched Zara laugh with her new friends from a dozen different worlds, he realized that sometimes the most important battles were won, not with weapons or strategies, but with the simple recognition that all sentient life had value. The war against the Devourers was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. But for the first time in cosmic ages, the forces of life and consciousness had a real chance of victory. And it all started with a human's decision to feed a hungry child, regardless of what species she belonged to. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy. Not their technology or their military might, but their stubborn insistence on treating alien beings as individuals worthy of compassion. It was a trait that had once made them seem weak and naive to other species. Now, it might be the key to survival for all sentient life in the universe.